Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Environmental Justice Now. My name is Leah Jones, and I am the Education Coordinator here at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Thank you all again so much for joining us for another episode this Friday. Before we get started today, I'd like to do a quick land acknowledgement. While we are while many of us are on video calls right now and joining from different places, we just want to remind ourselves that we gather on the unceded land of the indigenous peoples. I'm joining in from so-called Richmond, Virginia, and I'm currently located on the land of the Powhatan and Chickahominy peoples. So if you are unsure whose land you are on and would like to find out, you can visit this website here, native-land.ca, to find out. So today on Environmental Justice Now, we do come with heavy hearts and many prayers for those who have been and continue to be affected by the recent horrendous extreme climate events, especially those who have lost their lives to Hurricane Ida. The total is up to 46 and counting now. So we really want to take this time today to reflect on these extreme weather events that have happened historically and that are continuing to happen now, especially as we move forward across and we see these horrific climate events happen throughout the nation and here in Virginia as well. So as we reflect, we'll also end with a few opportunities for flood resiliency in Virginia. So please stay tuned to learn more about those opportunities. For those of you who may not know, this past Sunday, Hurricane Ida touched down at the coast of Louisiana and has been moving through multiple states throughout the Gulf and eastern coast of the nation. Hurricane Ida will go down in history as one of the most powerful storms to ever hit the United States, and thus far it's topping as the world's fifth most dangerous hurricane to touch land thus far in history. So this is a very big deal, right? Hurricane Ida has resulted in blackouts in the entire city of New Orleans and extreme structural damages, including damage to water, sewage, and passable roadways. During the storm, all 8 of the major transmission lines that supply energy to New Orleans failed. Though we are beginning to reach the end of the summer, higher temperatures still present a threat to so many residents now without power, meaning there is no air conditioning. A recent article from the New York Times states that the inability to run air conditioning threatened to become a dangerous problem for vulnerable residents in the region, as heat and humidity made the air in much of southern Louisiana and Mississippi feel hotter than 100 degrees. These blackouts are especially alarming not only for those who have lost power in their homes and businesses, but also for local hospitals in Louisiana that are still actively treating and admitting patients. With the Delta variant still on the rise and new strands popping up, Hurricane Ida comes with a list of pressing health concerns along with all the damages that has brought to communities across the coast. And much of what I've said already, although it applies to Louisiana, yes, it also applies to many of the other states who are dealing with the effects of Hurricane Ida as well. Reported this past Tuesday, more than 1 million people were without power, water, and sewage in Louisiana. Many, if they were able to, evacuated Louisiana cities, leaving their homes behind. As of today, September 3rd, Louisiana government officials have alerted residents to stay away from Louisiana as much of the necessary infrastructure needed for day-to-day life, like everyday water use, still needs to be repaired. Local officials have shared that these repairs could take several days, even weeks, and even in the most vulnerable of areas, even months. This devastation falls upon the 16th year anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, a catastrophic climate event that has damaged so much. The hurricane took away loved ones, homes, businesses, and much more for families in Louisiana, much like we're seeing in this moment now. I'm sure many of us still remember the severity of Hurricane Katrina, as the wards and counties most affected by that hurricane were still recovering even before Hurricane Ida hit. It is truly heartbreaking to think now, with Hurricane Ida, the same families that had to suffer through Hurricane Katrina now have to again live through another climate tragedy. These same communities are most vulnerable to flooding, having to experience this repeated trauma of loss and destruction at no fault of their own. How many times? How many times can our neighbors be physically and emotionally put out on a whim, ultimately growing tired of losing their communities, their safety, and their peace of mind to extreme water-related weather events? Unfortunately, I'm sure many of us have also seen that Hurricane Ida, as I mentioned before, is still passing through multiple states along the coast, including Tennessee, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, as well as some of the remnants hitting here in Virginia. I'm sure many of us have seen some very alarming clips with flooding reaching inside of buses, inside of apartment buildings, so high up to even your knees. Cars obviously can't drive through. We see that now more than ever, this is the time that we really need to address hazardous flooding and climate change as a result to flooding. Governor Northam issued a state of emergency earlier this week on Tuesday following flash flooding, power outages, and tree falling that had already occurred in multiple counties of Southwest Virginia, including Buchanan County. Though Virginia was not by any means hit as hard by Hurricane Ida this week, flooding is definitely not new to Virginia at all. In fact, the Hampton Roads area and several communities in the central Virginia deal with hazardous flooding on a regular basis and have had to adapt to new environments and in some cases had to relocate their own homes, like we have seen in Louisiana and now in New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. It's very alarming, right? As negative effects of climate change continue to worsen, storms will only continue to be more severe and less predictable. Let's take a moment to think about what that reality looks like for those who are most affected by these extreme weather events. It only means more destruction to our neighbors, communities, more loss of beloved family and friends, continued displacement of people who have to flee their homes because of hazardous flooding and dangerous winds that could have damaged or totally swallowed their homes. I mean, in this case, we've seen, especially in Louisiana, that people's entire roofs have been ripped off as a result of this hurricane, these storms. And this is just the beginning of hurricane season. We are reminded now more than ever that hazardous flooding is not something that we can avoid. It has to be addressed. And we need plans for action and resilience to rebuild and invest in our communities that have already been damaged and that are most vulnerable to catastrophic weather events like flooding. And I know that I mentioned earlier, flooding in Virginia is not new, right? I do, however, think that many of us do get the opportunity to ignore it if we don't live on the coast. But especially with Hurricane Ida now, I think that is something that simply cannot be ignored as we see buses fill up and honestly, rats in streets swim in pools of water in New York, all the way down to here in Virginia, as people continue to have to deal with the water damages that exist in their local communities, surrounding their homes, their businesses, their churches. So there is good news, however. In order to begin to address these flooding events here in the state of Virginia, there is something called the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. So the state has begun to try to address this regular flooding with this fund. that will only begin to worsen with extreme weather events and increased frequency with the worsening effects of climate change. This Community Flood Preparedness Fund was presented as an opportunity to begin investing in communities most vulnerable to flooding. It was passed during the 2020 session of the General Assembly, and the fund was established to provide support for regions and localities across Virginia to reduce the impacts of flooding, including flooding driven by climate change. The fund will prioritize projects that are in concert with local, state, and federal floodplain management standards, local resilience plans, and the Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan, which I'll explain a little bit more about in just a second. The fund is set to empower communities to complete vulnerability assessments and develop and implement action-oriented approaches to bolster flood preparedness and resilience. It is super important that our neighbors most vulnerable to flooding know about this fund and are applying to the grants for this fund, as it dictates that no less than 25% of the monies dispersed from this fund each year shall be used for projects in low-income geographic areas. That means for our neighbors in vulnerable communities, most vulnerable communities, communities of color, low-income communities consistently affected by flooding, please apply to these grants. Please apply to to receive these funds as a means to begin projects to build that resilience and invest in your communities for flood resilience as flooding continues to maybe worsen as climate change worsens, right? These grants are on a deadline, and applications for the first round of these grants are actually due today, September 3rd by 4 p.m. You can see this link here to learn more about this fund, how to apply, as well as the application. Although I know right now, if you are just figuring out or learning about this fund, 4 p.m. today, September 3rd, is quite soon, right? However, they are also accepting applications for round 2 of these grants, which will be due by 4 p.m. on November 5th. So please be sure to check out this website listed above on the screen right now. Now more about the Coastal Resiliency Master Plan that I mentioned. The Community Flood Preparedness Fund is actually a part of this Coastal Resiliency Master Plan. In 2021, Governor Ralph Northam introduced something called Executive Order 24, which called for the state to provide a pathway to increase resilience to these hazardous areas in the Commonwealth, and it includes a provision for the Commonwealth's first Coastal Resilience Master Plan, with the goal of aligning state efforts and assisting local governments in reducing flood risk through planning and implementing large-scale flood protection and adaptation initiatives. The Virginia Coastal Resilience Master Plan is just the beginning. This is a framework for action. Quoting Governor Ralph Northam, it is Virginia's roadmap to make our built environment more resilient to floods, hurricanes, fires, and other extreme weather events. Further, it seeks to justify and explain the costs and necessary funding to move Virginia to the forefront of innovative and essential adaptive capacity, and to make Virginia a leader in coastal adaptation and living with water in our climate change future. The master plan is set to be updated every 5 years and reflect the best available science as required by this executive order. So and now that this is just the beginning of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, it's very much still in the beginning stages. And as the state begins to roll out this plan, they are asking now to hear from the public. And it is so crucial that our vulnerable communities are aware that this plan exists, once again, aware that this fund exists. And now that they are asking to hear from the public, there are multiple public meetings that have been scheduled for residents to attend, especially in the Hampton Roads areas, multiple Hampton Roads areas, to voice their concerns and own experience with flooding happening throughout this month. So the first meeting just happened, not the first meeting, but one of the, in the next round of meetings that have happened, just yesterday was a meeting in Portsmouth, For those who missed that one, the next meeting will actually be September 9th at Norfolk State University from 5 to 7 p.m. For those of you who are friends on our Facebook page, we'll be sure to post these flyers and this information along with the 2 other meetings that are planning to follow it in the Hampton Roads areas as well. So please be sure to keep a lookout on that. And to learn more about the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, please check out this website here listed on the screen now. So just to one more time review the resources that are available for this fund, please check out this link here on the DCR page to learn more about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund and find out how you can apply for local projects in your community to improve flood resilience. Also, please visit more about the Coastal Resilience Master Plan, where you can also find more about where the meetings are taking place, the dates the meetings are taking place, and the times that the meetings are taking place. And once again, lastly, please also be sure to keep up with Virginia IPL by joining our newsletter, as we will also be sharing the location, times, and dates for these public meetings for folks, our neighbors who live in the Hampton Roads area, to share more about their own experiences with flooding. Now, lastly, before signing off, please just take a moment today to reflect on those who have been severely impacted or impacted at all by Hurricane Ida. This is truly a crazy time, and prayers are needed more than ever. So please stay up to date on flood news and share with your neighbors all of this information that we've shared here today with you, especially about the Community Flood Preparedness Fund. Even if you are not in a flooded area, please send this information to anyone that you may know who does live in a flooded area. Share it with your congregations. Share at the beginning of services. It is so crucial that people, especially in the most vulnerable communities who are most affected by flooding, to know that these funds exist and apply and receive these funds. So please reach out to us if you have any other questions about these funds that are available, or any questions at all related to the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you all next week on our next episode. Thank you.